I love the film Inglourious Basterds, because rather than tackling the oversaturated topic that is the ethics of war, it attacks the way we portray conflict and highlights the power of perspectives to influence people. The film questions the hypocrisy of the Allies in the fight against the Jew-hating Nazis, often drawing parallels with the injustices of black individuals.
Auf der Schiffsreise lag ich da in Ketten.
Ja.
Als ich in Amerika ankam, wurde ich da in Ketten zur Schau gestellt.
Ja.
Bin ich die Geschichte des Negers in Amerika?
Nein.
Also dann muss ich King Kong sein.
Not at all condoning the actions of the Nazis, but bringing to light this blind following of false dogma due to our exposure to propaganda and stigmatized media, questioning and condemning of the fascist Nazi regime and their blind hatred towards Jews. The film highlights King Kong, the large, black, uncouth beast, to be an analogy for the treatment of Africans in America, and thus exposes the ambivalence in our oppositions to the Nazis. The film's advocacy of oppressed voices continues with the revenge story of the Jewish orphan and cinema owner Shoshana. After the brutal execution of Shoshana's family, she grows a lust for the demise of Nazis, and when the opportunity presents itself to not only kill Nazis, but Hitler himself, she uses what had given her salvation to annihilate the Nazis. Film. She sends a message to the Nazis, a message that is sure to sear into their minds. Inglourious Basterds gives a voice to the oppressed, to those in search of emancipation. However, such a platform is hard to obtain in reality. Not all of us are as fortunate, yet so unfortunate as Shoshana. But the indigenous voices of today do indeed share with Shoshana is their power. Their power to recreate emotions, their power to return the past, their power to reenact justice after atrocity. These texts give a platform to indigenous people to rise above their oppressors and express their adversities in a comprehensible way, for those who haven't shared their history and those who've lost it. The Rabbits, co-produced by illustrator Sean Tan and writer John Marsden, is an allegorical text that serves to highlight not only the atrocities of imperial expansion, but also the consequences. By using John Marsden's personal experience and culture to produce a piece of literature that depicts a unique and powerful interpretation of European colonization, Tan and Marsden portray the events in the story as a catalyst for the perpetual struggles of indigenous individuals. Tan and Marsden accomplish this through their commentary on the dynamic between the Aboriginal population and European settlers. Marsden cleaves the world of the Rabbits in two in the opening sentence, "The Rabbits came many grandparents ago." Marsden uses this line to engineer the foreign aspects of the Bilbies, as revealed later in the text. Marsden uses short and sharp sentences depicting the curiosity and the integrity of the Aboriginal perspective. The use of these reminiscent sentences is to drive the suspense of the story. If the allegory to Aboriginal Australians weren't clear, the tone generated by this language should give an indicator of where the events are going. While Marsden's language in the text can be interpreted as archaic and nonsensical, under inspection, that thought is very Eurocentric. The way we perceive time is wholly different from that of people we've been isolated from for tens of thousands of years. Looking at the way of speech as inferior is completely ignorant to the fact that we're still able to understand the events and feel an incredible emotional impact from them. This kind of language is purposefully chosen in order to criticize the dismissal of indigenous issues due to their culture and beliefs to be archaic. Tan complements the divide of the two worlds phenomenally with his artistry. The vibrant, warm colors of the Bilby land symbolize their connection to these earthy colors. The Bilbies are shown to be deeply rooted to their land through the visual techniques depicted on the land, finger painting intertwined with spots of vibrant blues, pinks, and yellows. The aspects of nature are in harmony, making the calamity brought upon by European arrival even more devastating. The beautiful abstract imagery of the land, juxtaposed to the arrival of the European fleet, grandiose imagery suggesting the Rabbits themselves see themselves as such reverent beings, casting a grave, foreboding shadow behind them and in front of them, referencing their impact on the land in which they come to inhabit. The voice of the Bilbies quashed by the lavish presence of the Rabbits, only small figments in their home land. Despite the grand presence of the Rabbits, the vectors of the spread direct our attention towards the Bilbies, reminding us this is the Bilby story. Their perspective, the hyperbolic alien imagery of the Rabbit technologies, help to connect to the Bilby's plight. The vectors pull us across all directions to symbolize the utter puzzlement of the indigenous people, until we settle at a puzzling shot of Rabbit society. As our eyes are pulled down the image, we are at first exposed to the upper echelon of the society, the allusion to the monarchy and the high-rise buildings, famous to civilized society. But as the vectors pull us from the canopies of the skyscrapers to the midground, we see cracks in the perfect image, a release of pollution into the air, a sacrifice for a more modern society. And finally, the absolute bottom depicts the lives of the Rabbits and Bilbies, neither prospering, neither particularly happy, all wearing solemn or negative expressions, and plastered on the walls is a sign, might equals right. Individuals are born in a society who hate them from birth, from the color of their skin. As we scale down this image, we can see the holes in Rabbit or European society, how yes, it is undoubtedly those in the canopies and higher class, who thrive in luxury and prosperity. It is when we look below that threshold that cracks emerge, that those in the lower class suffer due to the selfishness of those in the skyscrapers. Their demand is our work, questioning the reality of the so-called civilized society of rabbits, and the bilbies are left voiceless, dysfunctional in the wake of the rabbit society. Their voice boxes forcibly removed from their bodies, they have no say in the degradation of their homeland. However, it is in the last spread that we find hope. In a situation of despair and dread is when we turn to those we never listened to before. It is in our darkest hour of need that we are all equal. And it is in our darkest hour that the bilbies will regain their voices and help us from the rabbits. Udguru Nunukal had a similar discovery during her time as a signaller during World War II. Despite her indigenous heritage and despite the racial prejudice against such people, she was respected for her work. During a time of great importance and strife, she was given a platform of equality. However, as soon as it was over, the prejudice returned, and it was business as usual. Udguru Nunukal's We Are Going explores a period of inequality for Indigenous people. This political poem champions Aboriginal voices in the face of systematic oppression and the loss of Aboriginal tradition and land claimed by European settlers. We Are Going delivers a mournful and powerful goodbye to the old ways of Aboriginal people, whose old ways have been forcibly ushered out. We Are Going takes the form of a single stanza, lamenting on the current state of their old tribe. European colonialism and urbanization had detrimental effects on the preservation of Aboriginal lands. To Aboriginal people, their connection to their land is beyond important. It is the very essence of their belief system. The use of litany in the lines, We Are, emphasizes the Aboriginal connection to the land. They see themselves as part of the cyclical nature of life. The obliteration of these old ways, of their connection to the land and their past, sparks a deep feeling of distaste. The poem endeavors to capture this burst of frustration and ardor within Aboriginal individuals in the face of a situation they're powerless to fight against. Udguru develops a stagnant mood through the use of alliteration, is subdued and silent, implanting a seed of dread and despondency within the audience. This feeling derives from the impotence experienced by the Aboriginal people, the homeland being used as a dumping ground by European settlers, used and abused for commercial gain. Udguru likens white men to ants, their systematic hustle and bustle as seen in the rabbits, the way they purloin and abduct. Each of these lines are a cut to the ethos of Western ideals. By the end, Udguru cleaves through the Western romanticization or colonization with the reality and heartbreak from the perspective of the Aboriginal people. When a white man returns to his hometown after decades, he can expect either warm welcomes or a nostalgic experience. However, if an Indigenous person was to return to their home, they'd be met with hostility and alienation. Their home is certainly no longer their home, construed by the ideals of Western society. Udguru captures this feeling of isolation and anger within Aboriginal people. Udguru takes this power she's generated, not to attack his Eurocentric society, but to indicate what it has done to Aboriginal society. The issues that Indigenous people face can be a hard concept to grasp as a whole. Overwhelming your audience with the perspective of an entire group of people can often leave the reader more confused than educated. That's why intimate stories like The Sapphires allow for characters to take the limelight in order to show the nuance in that Indigenous experience. The film uses various techniques to explore racism and interpersonal conflict as a result of systematic oppression. When Cynthia and Gail visit their cousin Kay's house in Melbourne to inform her about their ambitions and ask her to join them, the world is once again split in two. The scene employs juxtaposition to reflect both Aboriginal and white Australian lifestyles. When the scene begins, the sisters unexpectedly arrive at Kay's suburban house. A mise-en-scène displays Kay inside gathered with white women, as Kay was hosting a Tupperware party. The lighting inside is bright and flashy, a rendition of various retro colors. Greens and oranges resonate within the audience to create an artificially happy environment. The scene flicks to a shot of Cynthia and Gail, the lighting becoming darker, making the girls seem darker than usual. Blair uses this technique various times to emphasize the difference between the two distinct worlds, and how Kay is someone who can exist between these barriers. Such is the fate for many Indigenous individuals during the Stolen Generation. Many individuals who were half-caste were taken from Indigenous homes and placed into white families for their benefit. This overbearing parentalism of the Australian government has gone on to sever Indigenous lives from their culture and ancestry. This loss of identity is present throughout the development of Kay's character, and she learns to accept and acknowledge this side of her, in contrast to her initial rejection of her cousins. Kay's initial discomfort is something experienced by many Indigenous people, a feeling of shame of their culture, a rejection of their past. However, it's when people like Blair take a stand and celebrate their culture that power is given back to these people. The Sapphires celebrate this aspect of Kay as something she chooses to be a part of by the end of the film. Each one of these voices has a fire behind it, something they wish to express, a voice they're dying to make heard. Their vessel for this endeavor is text, because texts are so much more than words. They're powerful. They cut, they incinerate, they question, they empathize. The suffrage of Indigenous voices has been silenced for far too long. and so it is when they rise, through text, that they have power.